Hello and welcome to the 13th video in this series, making simple Flappy Robin for Android using Cocos2dx, this time version 3. So in this video then what we're going to do is, we've got the game running here in front of me, we're going to add some labels on so that before the Robin the screen is tapped, it says tap screen to start, and when the Robin dies it'll throw up game over here, and that will be replaced now with the tap screen to start. We'll put an exit, a settings buttons in, and we'll also put the score and the high score labels in, which obviously we'll start using then later on. So labels then are quite simple to add and create. They're even simpler in Cocos2dx version 3 than they were in the previous versions, and what we use is we use Cocos2d and a label like so, whoops, and then the first one I'll call score label like so. Before we had different classes for bitmap font or TrueType font. We're going to use TrueType font in this, and actually that reminds me, you need to add to your resources, but don't copy into resources in Xcode. If you're in Xcode, there's the fonts folder inside the project resources. If I just bring that across here, you'll see resources, fonts, and then marker felt inside there. You'll need to add that inside the Xcode project if you haven't, or do whatever you need to do inside Visual Studio with the resources so that it detects it. I'm not sure. Eclipse, you won't need to do anything. And we then use the marker felt by name as the font name. So this is how we declare a label. Before we do anything else, I'm just going to go into constants.h and just define here k font name so that we don't need to keep typing it, and it's just marker felt.ttf. Now one of the things they've improved in version 3 compared with the version 2. In version 2 on the Mac you'd had to have typed fonts and /, and for Android not with the directory, and also not with the .ttf either. I think now you can just leave it as marker felt.ttf. To be honest, I can't remember whether it's with or without, but we'll know because it'll crash if it does, or not show the correct font if it's without. Anyway, so we'll put the font name like that, then declined as a constant. Go back into hello world scene.h, and now let's just add in the rest of our labels as well. So we have the high score label, the exit, the settings, the restart, and the game over label. So high score, exit, call it start label, game over label, and what have I forgotten, settings label. So that's our labels then actually declared as private variables, but we need to create them. Now each time we create the label we'll need to call a create. We'll need to set its position, set its color, set its anchor point, and then add it as a child, and this is something that will be repeated for each label. Now I basically repeated all the code inside the initialization in the version 2 series, but we'll do things a little bit cleaner in this one. We'll actually make a function which returns us a label. So we'll say Cocos2d and label, returns us a pointer then, and we'll call it add label. And in fact maybe later on we'll move this function into the game manager or something like this, we'll see. Anyway, so we want to add in our label, and then definition then, whoops, some stuff's come up on the screen there that's not needed. You can see that was just looking in the tests section of the framework just to check I was doing things right earlier. So we've got return a label then, so we want a const and float and the font size that we're going to have, and we want a const and a car pointer to the text we want on the label. Then we want a const Cocos2d vec2, and that's the anchor, so the actual anchor, and then I'll just copy this, and the last but not least will be then the position that we want the label positioned. So that saves us a little bit of code later on. So we're just going to go into hello world scene.cpp and drop down to the bottom, and I'm just going to hit build to make sure nothing's quite gone wrong yet. Of course we haven't declared this function down the bottom here, but we will shortly. Things seem okay. So just paste in the function here then, and take the hello world and drop that in front of the add label. And this now then allows us to flesh out our function to actually add in our label. So the first thing we do then is we say that, label and pointer to the label equals, and then we want to say label and create with true type font. So we want our text, we want our K font name, and we also want then our font size. And now it's just simply a case of saying the label and set the anchor point to the anchor, and the label and set position to the position. And then we also want to, let's make it red, so we can say set color, and then there's a color 3B, I think, with dash dash and red, like so. And then last but not least, we can add it as a child, and we add the label. And what we'll also do is we'll use the Robin Z index to make sure that the labels appear in front of everything else. So the Robin, and last but not least, of course, we have to return the label that we've created, and that should do that. So fairly simple stuff. Now we can now go up into the initialization then and start looking at getting our labels on the screen. First thing I want to do though is I want to declare some constants, which I'm just going to do below this line here, and these are just the positioning of our labels, so it makes things easier to change later on. So we'll say label font size is equal to, and I'm going to say 48 multiplied by get scale y multiplied by get scale factor, of course, so that everything's scaled according to our resolution, and make that a little low. And I'm just going to copy this and just drop a couple of lines in here like so, because we've got a couple of other constants. So we want score position, and you'll see where these will be used. Score position x, and we want score position y, and last but not least settings gap. This is just basically for all of the positioning, so we'll do 24 here, 12 and 24. So if we want to move things around, we just have to change these and not dive into the code somewhere. And now we can go about adding on our labels, which we'll actually do after the setting of the Robin's position here. So the first one we need to add then is the score label, and in fact what I'll do is I'll just add the score label, and then I'll add in the rest of the code and then come back basically into the video, so that it doesn't get completely boring. There's no point in repeating the code. So we've got label font size. The text we want then is score and 0 for now. The anchor point that we want for the score label is a vec2, and this is going to be positioned relative to the left-hand side of its label and the left-hand side of the screen. So it's a 0.0 for the x and a 1.0 for the y, and that should be a vec2 here. And then in the position here we want another vec2, and the position this time is going to be the score position x. And then what we want here is a little bit more complicated. I'm just make some space. For the y, we want the visible size dot height minus the score position y, because remember our anchor point's set to 1.0. Don't worry too much about this, and of course Xcode has tried to make things neater for me, but doesn't help with the video. Okay, so what this will have done then with the score label here is got our score label, and we'll actually inside this function down the bottom here with the add label then actually added it to the child, coloured it red, and created everything as we need. So if I just run the application, just check that the label is added okay. And you can see we've got score 0 now in the top left hand side of the screen, also in the correct font. So what I'm going to do then actually is because although I like to type the code out, this really is repetitive. We're basically for each label now just going to add in the code here. So I'm going to do some copy and pasting, and I'll see you in a jiffy. Okay then, so the code's in. I'll just talk through it very quickly just so it's clear what's going on. We want to position the score label in the top left hand corner of the screen. That means its x is this score position x, which is a scaled 24 pixels, And we want the left-hand side of the label to be 24 pixels from the edge of the screen, which is why we've got the anchor point, the x coordinate of the anchor point at 0. And then for the y, we want the height minus the number of pixels for position y, so we want that based on the top of the label, so the anchor point is 1.0. For the high score label, we have exactly the same anchor point, but we want it to go below the score label, and we want the gap to be the same between these two labels as it is between the score label and the top of the screen. So what you'll see here is, unfortunately, to keep it all on the screen for the recording, it's a bit of a mess, but we've got the position x as the x, but then we've got the height minus the position y, and then minus the height of the score label. The game over label then gets an anchor point of 50/50, goes in the middle of the screen, as does the tap screen to start label. The settings goes in the top right, so then we've got the width minus the settings gap, and the height minus the settings gap. And in fact, I'm just looking now at settings gap and position y. We might change those around a little bit, but anyway, that means a 1.0, 1.0, and then the bottom right hand corner we've got the exit label. And the result is, if I run the application, we see something like this. Now you realise this thing I was hesitating there is I'm not too keen on the way this gap looks here, so actually we might change this now to make these gaps look a little bit better. I'll just do that. I'll change this position y also to 24 then. And probably should have kept the score and the settings together, but never mind. Okay, things look a little bit neater now. The only thing, of course, is that this is all a mess in front of here because there are labels on top of each other, and that's the last thing we need to sort out now. So what I want to do then is I want to say that the game over label, set visible, and we'll set the visible to false when we start the game. We do, however, want tap the screen to start to be there. And now all that remains is to put these labels on when we need them. So when it's game over, we want game over to show. So scroll down to find our game over function. Here it is. So we'll set the visible to true. Now the tap to start should already be false, so we don't need to worry about that. But when we re-enable after game over, we want to get rid of the game over label. But what we also want to say then is that our start label set visible to true. And then when we actually start a game, that's when we want the start label to go false. So now if I run the application, and now we've got tap the screen to start. It's not quite perfect because the robin's in the way, but when I tap it disappears, and now if I let the robin fall, we get this game over for a couple of seconds. That disappears and we've got the tap the screen to start. The only other thing we could do maybe actually is just alter the position a little of this tap the screen to start. I'm just going to scroll up into the init function here. So for this game over label and for the start label then, let's trying to have a think here now. Let's have the tap the screen to start then, instead of it width by 2 and height by 2, let's actually go a little bit higher up the screen. So let's say that we'll have the height multiplied by, let's make it 3/4 of the way up the screen. So 3 and then divided by 4. It's probably a little bit high up the screen, but maybe it'll be out the way of our robin then. Okay, so tap the screen to start, and now we get then the game over. And then it'll say, hopefully, tap the screen to start. It's a little bit high, but it doesn't matter. Okay, good then. So that's it then for this video. We've got the labels added, the game overs disappearing and appearing, and tap the screen to start, so things are looking a little bit neater. What we're going to do next then is probably add in some sound effects into the application so that we get some explosions when it hits a tube or dies, and also when we tap the screen. So that's it for now then. Thanks very much for watching. Comments, questions, criticisms, welcome, as always, on YouTube.